Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, you have the next episode of Recent Reads. Before I talk about the books that I actually did read this week, I am going to mention one that I was a little bit wary of when I put it on my TBR, gave myself the option of DNFing it. As I was looking at my TBR, more and more books were taken off of that. I just kind of went, I really don't want to read this. And I looked up more reviews, and it does lean into the horror. And I've realized with a few other books that I will mention a little bit later, I don't like that at all. So I decided I'm just not going to pick this book up. I'm taking it off my TBR. That does not bode well for Goldsboro. This book will be getting on hold. It's just not my cup of tea. So now let's get into the books that I did read for this past week. I have 6 books here. I am probably going to finish a 7th later on tonight when I'm working on cross stitching because it's an audiobook. I will talk about my issues with the audiobook narrator for that one next week. But for now, I'm going to talk about the 6 books that I did read. And I'm going to start with Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. I love the design on this. I did not read it physically. I read this one via audiobook, and this one I really enjoyed. I think it was last week or the previous episode where I read All of Us Villains, and it had a bit of a Hunger Games trope, but not done well, done more of like a copycat. This one also had a Hunger Games feel to it. However, it was done well enough, and I really, really enjoyed all the allusions to Antony and Cleopatra. Now, I will admit, that is one of Shakespeare's plays that I don't know as well, but I do know the history behind Antony and Cleopatra and Augustus, or Octavian. I thoroughly enjoyed all of the different connections and allusions that Chloe Gong was making between those. I don't know whether she consulted the actual historical time period or it was based more on the play itself, but I loved it. And the idea of them jumping into different bodies, which is a big thing in this world, it did not throw the plot off or my enjoyment off for me like I thought that it might. It worked, and I still understood what was going on. And there was a reveal that came through that around 70%, where I actually enjoyed it. And it made a lot of sense. I did not expect this sort of a reveal to come. I was like, oh. And then the last little bit in the plot, something shifts. Like literally like the last paragraph or so of this book, it shifts. I'm like, Chloe Gong, why did you do this to me? I now have to wait until the next book is published because this one just came out a couple months ago. I also really enjoyed seeing her writing at an adult level as opposed to a young adult, which her previous works have been. A lot of authors are transitioning back and forth in various areas and not always getting it right. But I think that, in my opinion, Chloe Gong did it well. Next, we have one that sort of confused me. I didn't dislike it, but I never really settled anywhere on an opinion of it. And that is The Red Scholar's Wake by Aliette de Bodard. She has French nationality, but she's of Asian descent, and I can't remember exactly what. It does not mention. I was hoping that the author panel on here would mention that. I've read it, but I can't remember. So in this, it's very Asian based, and you get thrown into a world, a science fiction world, where there's a lot of things that do not function like they do in the world, like the world of reality. And I just went, I don't understand what's going on here. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it fit. The 2 main characters, one is a human and one is a ship mind. So she can be a lot of different places and they have a relationship, but the creation of the ship minds really wasn't ever explained. There was just a lot that I just did not understand, and it kept me from getting into the narrative. So this book was fine, but there was just a lot of world building that you were just expected to know, and it wasn't set up. So I have conflicted feelings on it. It's not a bad book. It's not something that I'm going to hold on to though. Next, we have the other Sebastian de Castell book. And this is another one that I'm conflicted about. Not because it was bad. So it's The Malevolent Seven. Not because it was bad, but because I loved Spellslinger so much, and I saw so many things in here that I loved. But the plot didn't really grip me. And I think the way that the plot unfolded and a lot of the reveals, it was very much, there was this show on a network that I can't remember called Leverage, where they're going in and they're doing cons, and then at the end they explain how everything unfolded and how you figured that out. And it works and you can go with it. Does it get old after a while? Sometimes. With this, at so many points throughout this book, there were those after the fact reveals, and I just went, wait, can we believe anything that's going on? It undermines the credibility a little bit, but there was just so much that I loved, and I'm definitely giving Sebastian de Castell multiple chances. I'm gonna read the rest of the Spellslinger series. I loved it. I don't know that I will continue with this. There's a possibility that this is a series. I don't know for sure whether or not it is, but I didn't dislike this book. It just didn't live up to the really high expectations that I had after reading Spellslinger. Then we come to another book that, again, didn't live up to expectations and had some issues that as the book continued, just kind of went, oh man, this had so much potential and it didn't live up to it. And that is The Ones We Burn by Rebecca Mix. Now it ended up that I was reading these two books at the same time. I was reading The Malevolent Seven physically, and I was reading this via audiobook. And both of them involved blood mages with very similar magics behind it, which I found really interesting. This one just, I could never get a grip, or maybe the author could never get a grip on how she wanted this world to unfold, how she wanted her characters to interact, what sort of personalities, where the sides were. There were so many back and forth reveals and twists and turns. I'm like, who's supporting who? What's the good side? What's the bad side? There wasn't even any nuance, because is any one side completely good or bad? No. But it just, everything kept shifting to whatever she wanted at the particular moment. I'm like, that does not make a lot of sense character-wise for this character and how you built her up to this point. And just change after change, the plot shifted, went back and forth. And this was clearly a fantastical world, but multiple times Rebecca Mix brings in very realistic, science-y type things. And I just went, you have not established the kind of world where that sort of thing would exist. And she tries to write about it in a fantastical sort of way, but it's very clearly derived on or from reality, from a science base and not a fantastical base. It ruined the suspension of disbelief at several points on this one, and just, it also got a little bit gross at points. And that's just not the type of book that I end up liking. And ultimately, this left me disappointed, so I will not be holding on to this one either. Then we come to one that I was nervous about because I thought it was more fantasy. And then as I heard more about it, because the 10th anniversary edition, heavily revised by the author, was released this month, I believe, or last month. And so a lot of people were picking it up again and talking about it, and more was revealed. I'm like, oh, I thought this was straight fantasy. It's not really. and that is the bone season. And so I was nervous going into it that I wouldn't like it, that I wouldn't be hooked in by the writing, by the characters, because this is my first Samantha Shannon book. I do have the prior of the Orange Tree, which is down on the bottom shelf. It has fallen over it. It's such a big book. I can't blame it. But in the bone season, this plays with something, a trope that I really enjoy, and that is alternative history. So this is set in the future by about 20 some years, but in the future of a world where things changed around 1900 and the British monarchy ended, and we have these otherworldly creatures coming in and controlling, and there is an idea of clairvoyance and all different types of that exist in the world, and they're hunted, they're not liked, and that's the world that we have. So it's a little bit sci-fi, but for me it didn't read like that. It read more like alternative history, historical fantasy, which is something that I have discovered that I really enjoy. And this book is struck a chord with me. I really like how Samantha Shannon portrayed the main character of Paige and how she explored this world and the nuances that she was exploring, that Paige was exploring, the main character. There were a couple times where there were some flashbacks where I didn't realize that it was a memory that Paige was experiencing, so that was a little bit disjointing at first, but nowhere near as much as the ones that we burn. The ones we burned. In that, it might have been because I was listening to it as an audiobook, but it would start talking about something. I'm like, wait, what? That's not where she left off. Samantha Shannon does it better in here. And I am fully hooked into this book. And I will say I did not read this version. This is the original version. I got an e-arc of the revised 10th anniversary version, so I do not know if it would have been a little bit more cringy in this book than in the other one, but I really enjoyed it. The only thing that I didn't necessarily like was a little bit of romancy type things, but not quite there, that come in towards the end. I'm like, okay, maybe I get it. Did we have to have this? No. I think from what I've heard that it's played up more in the original version of the book. Once again, a series that I started in my 10 series to start in 2023 has been a hit. This is the one that I was the most nervous about overall, because I have Jade City and Malice left on that list. So Bone Season was definitely a hit for me. And lastly, we have one that I didn't intend to read. It was not on my TBR for this month, but I needed to catch up on my page goals. I was falling behind on that. And so I decided, it's been a while since I have tried to actually complete Brandon Sanderson's backlist. And so I pulled out White Sand. And this is the complete bind up of all the different issues of White Sand. And there was an unboxing from a couple months ago of The Year of Sanderson where Chris was a character. That's Chris. The reason I didn't recognize her in that because I hadn't read this book yet. And a lot of people don't necessarily like White Sand and that world or the graphic novel version. I don't know why. I really enjoyed it. The artwork was fantastic. There were a couple points, action type scenes, where the art did get a little bit distracting and confusing. That's not in the storytelling, however. That's on the artwork side of it and how that was portrayed. But I really enjoyed the world in here. I love the worlds that Sanderson creates, and the way that this particular world was introduced and talked about and the different things going on. I ate it up. I thoroughly enjoyed this. So there you go. There are the 6 books that I read this past week. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.